Hello and welcome back. In this session, we will take a look at exceptions and how to handle exception in Python. What is an exception? An exception is nothing but whenever a program is running, then some event will trigger that program to abruptly end or come to a halt. So that is nothing but an exception. Exception handling is a mechanism of stopping normal program flow and continuing at some surrounding context or code block. So instead of halting the entire program, we can handle that exception and continue the program to either a surrounding context or a different code block. So we can also raise an exception to interrupt normal flow. It is not necessary that an external event should always trigger an exception. We can also raise an exception. There is a way of doing that in Python, and we can also handle an exception to resume the control. Okay, unhandled exception will terminate the program. If we don't handle the exception, it will abruptly end or terminate the program. So there is an exception object which is available with all the exceptions that will contain some information about the exceptional event which has occurred. So we will see an example of all of these. So let us go to PyCharm here. So let me comment out these code. So we are looking at exceptions. Okay. So let me try this. So 10 multiplied by 1 divided by 0. So anything divided by 0 is invalid. So let me execute this. I get 0 division error. So that means whenever Python executes this particular statement, 10 multiplied by 1 divided by 0, so this is an invalid expression. Okay, we cannot divide a number by 0. So that is why we get this 0 division error. So in order to continue, how do we handle this exception? Now we know that this particular statement is causing this exception. So what we can do is we can use try block, and within this try block we will add this statement, and then there is an except block, that is exception block. Which prints number cannot be divided by 0. So let me execute this. We tried to execute this. The program didn't abruptly end. However, it went to this exception block and it printed this value. So whenever we executed this, we got an exception called 0 division error. This except will catch all the exceptions. So if you want to catch specific exception, suppose say we know that the number cannot be divided by 0 and it is going to cause 0 division error. So in that case, we can add a specific exception called except 0 division error. And here I will put number cannot be divided by 0 And since this is a generic exception, I'm going to make this as exception caused and got generic exception. Okay, so now I will execute this. Okay, let me take out this. And re-execute this. Now it says number cannot be divided by 0. So in the earlier case, it went to this generic exception. However, if we know already which exception it is going to raise, we can provide that specific exception here. Okay, the specific exception is provided above the generic exception. So if I take out this and put it after this, I get error here saying that the generic default except must be last. So that means the order is very important here. The order is specific exception first, followed by generic exception. Now let me change this to 1 here. In this case, there is no exception because it is a valid statement here. So we should get no exception here. However, it has not printed any value. So let me put this within print method. Okay, so it has printed 10 and there is no exception here. Now another thing is, so let me comment out this except here. We can also have else with except. For example, if I change it back to 0 and execute this, I get this number cannot be divided by 0. However, if I change this to 1, I should be getting no exception caused along with the value here. So we can also use else. So there is another block which we can use, that is finally block. So this is a finally block. Now okay, let me change the value of 1 to 0 so that it causes an exception. Let me execute this. Okay, number cannot be divided by 0, so there is an exception caused and the finally block also got executed. So let me change this back to 1 and execute this. Now, even though there is no exception caused by this particular statement, we still get finally block is used. So this gets printed in both cases, whether there is an exception or not. So this finally block will always get executed. This finally block can be used to release the memory held by certain objects. For example, if you want to close the socket or close the database connection. So other thing which we need to see is how to raise an exception. Earlier we had seen one example wherein we were checking different condition based on the age of a person. So let us use the same example here. and we will raise an exception. Okay, so the age has to be a number, that is an integer. Okay, so if not type of age is integer, then raise type error, that is age needs to be integer value. Okay, so right now age is an integer value, so let me execute this. Okay, we shouldn't be seeing anything here because age is integer. However, if I change this to hi, which is a string, then I should get this type error. Okay, so this is this finally block, and after that you see age needs to be integer value. So this causes the program to halt. It is not always an external event. However, based on certain conditions, we can also raise an exception. So in this case, we have raised this type error exception. And the other thing which we need to look at is exception object contains information about the exceptional event. Say for example, in the earlier example, so let me change this back to 25 here. Okay, if we take the earlier example, here we were dividing it by 0 to get this zero division error. However, we can also have an object of this zero division error to get more information as ex, and then if you want to get more information on that particular object, then we can use format of ex. Okay, so let me execute this. Along with number cannot be divided by 0, which is user defined print method, this object will give you some information, that is division by 0. So this information is obtained from this particular object. It is not necessary that you have to have only one exception under except block. You can have multiple exception, and each exception is followed by a comma. For example, type error. Okay, so here it is checking for both zero division error as well as type error. Okay, so with this we have seen how to raise an exception, how to handle an exception, and how to get information from exception object. That is the end of this session. Thanks for watching.